do you take him as your head-to-head competitor?
You know, I don't really think about competitors all that much. You know, the goal of Tesla really is to accelerate the advent of electric cars. It's not to take market share away from other companies or do any of that sort of thing.
And then finally, let me come back to this sort of overarching theme for this talk, this competition is for losers idea, which is always this provocative way to title things, because we always think of the losers as the people who are not good at competing. We think of the losers as the people who are slow on the track team in high school, or who do a little bit less well on the standardized tests and don't get into the right schools. And so we always think of losers as people who can't compete. And I want us to really rethink and revalue this and consider whether it's possible that competition itself is off, that we're sort of, it's not just the case that we don't understand this monopoly competition dichotomy intellectually. So I've sort of been talking about why you wouldn't understand it intellectually, because people lie about it, it's distorted. We have all these, the history of innovation rationalizes what's happened in all these very, very strange ways. But I think it's more than just an intellectual blind spot. I think it's also a psychological blind spot where we find ourselves, you know, very, very attracted to competition in one form or another. We find it reassuring if other people do things. The word ape already in the time of Shakespeare meant both primate and imitate. And there is something about human nature that's deeply mimetic, imitative, ape-like, sheep-like, lemming-like, herd-like. And it's this very, very problematic thing that we need to always think through and try to overcome. And there is always this question about competition as a form of validation, where we go for things that lots of other people are going for. And it's not that there is wisdom in crowds. It's not when lots of people are trying to do something that's proof of it being valuable. I think it's when lots of people are trying to do something that is often proof of insanity. There are 20,000 people a year who move to Los Angeles to become movie stars. About 20 of them make it. I think the Olympics are a little bit better because you have you can sort of figure out pretty quickly whether you're good or not. So there's a little bit less of a dead weight loss to society. The sort of educational experience at a place, the pre-Stanford educational experience, there's always sort of a non-competitive characterization where I think most of the people in this room had machine guns and they were competing with people with bows and arrows. So it wasn't exactly a parallel competition when you were in junior high school and high school. There's always a question, does the tournament make sense as you keep going? And this is And so there is always this question, if people go on to grad school or postdoctoral educations, does the intensity of the competition really make sense? There's the classic Henry Kissinger line that describing his fellow faculty at Harvard, that the battles were so ferocious because the stakes were so small, describing sort of academia. And you sort of think on one level, this is a description of insanity. You know, why would people fight like crazy when the stakes are so small? But it's also, I think, simply a function of the logic of the situation. When it's really hard to differentiate yourself from other people, when the objective differences really are small, then you have to compete ferociously to maintain a difference of one sort or another that's often more imaginary than real. There's always sort of a personal version of this that I tell, where I was sort of hyper tracked. My 8th grade junior high school yearbook, one of my friends wrote in, I know you'll get into Stanford in 4 years as a sophomore. I sort of went to Stanford 4 years later, at the end of high school. Went to Stanford Law School. Ended up at a big law firm in New York, where from the outside everybody wanted to get in, on the inside everybody wanted to leave. And you had, and it was this very strange dynamic where after I sort of realized this was maybe not the best idea, and I left after 7 months and 3 days, one of the people down the hall from me told me, it's really reassuring to see you leave, Peter. I had no idea that it was possible to escape from Alcatraz, which of course, all you had to do was go out the front door and not come back. But so much of people's identities got wrapped up in winning these competitions that they somehow lost sight of what was important, what was valuable. Competition does make you better at whatever it is that you're competing on. Because when you're competing, you're comparing yourself with the people around you. You're figuring out, how do I beat the people next to me? How do I do somewhat better at whatever it is they're doing? And you will get better at that thing. I'm not questioning that. I'm not denying that. But it often comes at this tremendous price that you stop asking some bigger questions about what's truly important and truly valuable. And so I would say that don't always go through the tiny little door that everyone's trying to rush through. Maybe go around the corner and go through the vast gate that no one's taking. Thank you very much. Let's see. You should be careful. I haven't looked at the studies on this at Wharton. There were these studies done at Harvard Business School over the years where they found that you had these very extroverted people who weren't quite sure what they wanted to do after graduation. They all sort of come together for 2 years at business school. And you have this sort of bad wisdom of crowds dynamic where they look at what everyone else is doing, they listen to what everyone else is doing, and they found that whatever the largest number of people did was always a bad idea. So it was like the surfing analogy is like, if you're trying to catch a wave, you have to start paddling before the wave's there. Like once the wave's already there, you'll never catch the wave. It's past, and you should never try to catch the last wave. And so in 1989, all these people were trying to work for Mike Milken. It was a year or two before he went to jail and the whole junk bond thing blew up. In 99, 2000, people wanted to work in Silicon Valley for startups. They'd never wanted to do that before. This was just before everything went wrong. 05, 07, it was all real estate, all sort of private equity. So I think it's, I would say if everybody's doing, try not to do the thing that the largest number of people are doing.
So there are a lot of questions about first mover advantage on that, and how, on the one hand, if you're supposed to build a monopoly, you should be sort of first, right, in a domain where nobody else is active. On the other hand, we think of Facebook and Google and others who weren't the first to social networks or to search. How do you think about whether you should be first or later?
Well, you want to be, so the buzzword I give is you want to have the last mover advantage. You want to be the last. So if you want the chess analogy, if you move first, it's your white, it's equivalent to a 1/3 of a pawn advantage to go first. Last is, you sort of win the game, and it's like the Capablanca World Chess Champion line to begin, you must begin by studying the end game. And so it's always worth asking, how do these things play out over time? When at PayPal in March of 2001, we'd been in business for 27 months, we did this complicated discounted cash flow analysis on the business, and it's somewhat of a fictional exercise, but it did directionally show something that I think was very true, which was that 3/4 of the value of the company came from cash flows in years 2011 and beyond, and so most of the value in these companies is really far in the future, and therefore, people are always way too focused on the near term because that's the growth, that's the stuff you can measure. The durability is somehow harder to measure, but qualitatively far more important. And so I do think these questions about why will you be the last mover, why will you have a sustainable advantage, are the key questions to ask. Certainly, in many of the software businesses, the people who do something really well first also end up being last because they grow quickly enough that nobody can copy them. I would say that and this is again where the categories become a little tricky. I would say you could say Google and Facebook were not the first search engines or first social networking companies respectively, but maybe Google was the first with a PageRank algorithm that really automated search, and that was maybe a breakthrough that was very fundamental to search. And Facebook was the first social network that really got real identity to work. One of my good friends, Reid Hoffman, who started LinkedIn in 2003, in the 90s had started a company. In 1997, he started a company called SocialNet. So he already had social networking in the name of the company in 1997, 7 years before Facebook comes along. And their theory was that it was all about these social relations on the internet, and they were all going to be these complicated different things, and maybe you were a cat and I was a dog, and we'd have these avatars and how would we all get along? And that turned out not to be what people wanted, real identity, not fake identity.